Post Shifters, welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. I'm giggling and laughing my head off right now because Dale just came into the green room and we started chatting, and then he started telling this wonderful, fantastic story. And I'm like, I wanted to listen just me personally, and then I was like, wait a second, I actually gotta record a podcast, and I can't just hang out with Dale DeGroff online all day listening to amazing stories from this man and not get it down on tape. So luckily enough, I say this a lot, and I have to always pinch myself, even as I get older in the industry. I'm still this 26-year-old kid who came from Australia to Canada in 2006, and this was the real peak, like the real ramping up of the Renaissance, especially here in Canada, but in Australia, it had been for a few years. And of course, Dale was Dale, and so. I have an OCD for collecting books when I was in Australia. Like you can see, I still got a bit of a collecting book phase, but Dale's books were one of the first ones I got. And like, we're talking back in the day when the internet didn't exist. And so if you wanted to get information as a bartender, you literally have to go out and find it. I think 2002 or 3, Chanticleer, a very old forum, sort of set up, and you could do a few forums here and there, but nothing really crazy. But you'd have to go to every bookstore, and I had this thing that if I walked past a bookstore, I had to go in and try and find a new book that I didn't have. And so I've got a bunch of books that are getting on in their 30 years old. And but honestly, like Dale, I have to pinch myself because I'm still that 26-year-old kid, and I have the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with King Cocktail himself.
Thank you for having me on, Shawn. I'm delighted. Did we ever meet in Canada?
We've done it a couple of times, and it's always
so.
It's never one of those. It's never one of those times that I think last time we saw each other was Montreal Cocktail Fest last year.
Got you. Were you in Vancouver when I did the coffee cocktails at that dive bar? There was about 6 of us who ended up there. John Smolensky put it together. He said, I want to show you this really cool dive bar. And we got there right around midnight. And the bartender said, well, what's your favorite nightcap? And I said, coffee cocktail, the one with the cognac and the port. And he said, I don't know that one. And we don't have coffee at this time of night. I said, that's okay. There's no coffee in it. So I got behind the bar and I made them for everybody. I thought you might have been there for that.
We've crossed paths over the years so many times. And it's always... it's never like a one-on-one opportunity because it's always one of these crazy events or crazy dinners or crazy like seminars or something. There's always just so much going on. It's very rare that you get a chance to like sit down one-on-one.
Yeah, sadly, but
that's the nature of the beast.
It is.
But you've kept yourself busy as always. We're going to get into the DeGroff spirits because I'm really interested in that because I'm a massive fan of Ted Bro as well. So like you and him partnering up is like a dream come true for me. But a lot of people know your stories, but I'm curious about back in the day. So let's start way back in the day. Well, I shouldn't say way back in the day, but like back in the day, what was the catalyst for the cocktail renaissance for you? Because it's easy to say now, like, oh, we've got this wonderful cocktail culture going on all over the world. In the smallest markets, we have great cocktail culture. But what was the catalyst back then for you to actually go, oh, I want to get away from sweet and sour mix. I want to like start using real fruit. I want to start researching this stuff because, again, as I said in the intro, really tough to get knowledge at that time. So what was the catalyst for you to go, oh shit, I want to do better?
Well, when I decided not to be an actor, I was working at the Hotel Bel Air, which I have to tell you, Shawn, I have had the most incredible run of luck starting very early on, just sort of falling into these wonderful situations. And the Hotel Bel Air, top 10 hotels in the world at the time. And I just got a little bit of intel that they had fired their day guy. And this is 1978. I mean, this is pre HR departments and all that. So I walked into the bar and there was a big, tall, red-faced Irishman. He was the executive bartender, but he looked like a substitute teacher because that's exactly what he was. And he looked miserable. He was the executive bartender. He puts together the weddings for Reagan's kid. He doesn't stand behind the bar in day shift, So I walk in and I said, I hear you're hiring a day man. And there was this pause like, well, okay, where did you work? And I said, Charlie O's in New York City in Rockefeller Center. That was a Joe Baum, my mentor, of Restaurant Associates fame place. And he'd heard of it, and he said, "Oh yeah, well, come on behind the bar here, pour me a shot of anything. Make me a," and I think he had asked me to make a sidecar. And even in that era, even in the classiest places, in some cases because of unions, there was very little use of fresh juice. They were using sour mixes, which were released in this country in 1937. The first one was called 7-Eleven mix because there was no skilled labor.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knew how to balance stuff. There was no culinary stuff going on. It was, you made a Manhattan or a martini, fine, but then all the other stuff. I mean, and then when I started out as a young bartender, it was what I call the "that's how we make it here" era. The customer who walks up to the bar and says, "Bartender, I'll have a Singapore sling," and the two bartenders kind of sidle over to the other side of the bar, and one guy goes, "Yeah, that's it. That's rums and juices, right? Yeah, yeah, just rums and juices." So you throw it together, and they serve the guy, and he goes, "Bartender, I'm not tasting the gin in my Singapore slings." "Oh, that's how we make it here." We'd never say no to an order. He would just wing it, baby. Anyway, that's the world that I sort of grew up in. And what happened was, at the Hotel Bel Air, I met some extraordinary people, including the steward at the hotel, a guy named Paul Camarda, who later became my son's godfather. He was going to open a restaurant in Emeryville, Berkeley area with some friends of his, and I became friends. I said, "When you're ready to go, I'm ready to go. I want to run the bar up there." And when it finally came time for that, it was around 1984. The piano, by then I'd gone to the night shift at the Hotel Bel Air, and I had become really dear friends with a wonderful piano player named Bud Herman, who had just died. Bud played with Benny Goodman in Las Vegas, back in the day when the what was the famous Flamingo first opened. He was in the lounge and Goodman was in the big room, and he got subbed into the band when somebody got sick of the fact that they didn't like black people in Las Vegas. So his black piano player. Well, Goodman was the only guy that would give black people a place in a big orchestra in that era. Except for, no, that's not true. Well, yeah, there was Gene Krupa had one black trumpet player, a little jazz royalty in his orchestra. But anyway, Bud had died, and he was the room, and he had become a good friend. So I made the vow that, yeah, this is the time for me to go up there. And I took a hiatus for a couple of weeks, and I went up. And by now I'm married with two young children, babies, and I need a interim job at a hotel. I figure I'm a union guy. It should be easy up there. Yeah, easy. So the deal was, there was a line of about 600 people waiting for any hotel job, union job, and about 90 people would have to die before the first guy. And then you could figure out the arithmetic. I had to say to my friends, this is not looking good. And and again, serendipity steps in. And I get this call from New York from an old friend of mine from my New York days, because I had already been in New York since 1970, 68, 69. I went out to LA on a lark. I'll tell you that later. It's not important. But he said, Joe Baum, my mentor, who I knew well because my best friend's older brother did his advertising for him. He had a fancy advertising agency, very creative small agency called Lois, Holland and Calloway, the famous George Lois of the Big Idea book. If you're into advertising, and he said, "Get back here, man. Joe's looking for a head bartender at this place called Aurora, some kind of a French place on Madison Avenue, or right off of Madison Avenue." I said, "I'll be back tomorrow." I bought a ticket. And I said to the kids and wife, I have to go back to New York. This could be something really good. And that's when I'm smiling about what you said earlier before we went on the air, when you said, I'm still going into bookstores, grousing around looking for, well, in my interview, I had two, one with Ray Wellington, who was one of the cellar rats in the Windows on the World group that were brought along by Kevin Zraly, the famous Kevin Zraly of the Windows on the World wine book. Was my first interview because he was the GM. My second interview was the boss, co-owner Joe Baum. He said, "Okay, I want a pre-prohibition, late 19th century cocktail program. I don't want any mixers. I don't want any soda guns. I want you to do some research, get a book called How to Mix Drinks by Jerry Thomas. And you know what else I want? I want you to tell the stories because I know you know them. I know you know Ron. I know I've been at table with you. I know. I want the stories." And he left. So I went over to Fifth Avenue. This was Madison Avenue. And I went into Doubledays and I said, I'm looking for a book called How to Mix Drinks by Jerry Thomas. Ding, 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 ding. Nah, doesn't exist, man. I said, no, that's impossible. So then I went to Barnes and Noble, just down the block. I said, looking for this book, How to Mix Drinks, Jerry Thomas. Doesn't exist. I said, oh, come on. That's impossible. Is he really fucking with me? Is he doing that to me? So then I go to Scribner's, which was still open, which was the most famous bookstore, which sadly has been gone for years. They had a big arched window on the second floor where Hemingway's agent used to sit up there. And I walked into there and I figured if these guys don't know, nobody knows. And sure enough, I said the title and the guy said, just a minute. And he goes back. He's gone for like 15 minutes and he comes back. He's got a book. He said, okay, it's in the Old and Rare. It was published in 1862. Those guys were right. You're not going to find it. The last publication date is the private edition, 1929. You're not going to find this book. I found the book. Joe could have told me that book was written in 1862, but he doesn't work that way. That's not how he operates. Anyway, it was Joe, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, that made me start thinking about the business in a completely different way.
That's incredible. And where did you eventually find the book?
A guy who was the former head bartender at the 21 Club back in the 50s named Brian Ray had the largest collection of cocktail books in the country. I heard about him through Joe's partner, Michael Whiteman, who I went immediately to because I could talk to Michael. Joe was kind of intimidating, and Michael was kind of a cool guy. And as actually Michael and his wife, actually they hadn't gotten married yet. Roseanne Gold, who was Mayor Beam at that time's chef at Gracie Mansion, right? They both helped me a lot. But I got the book, the 1887 edition of it, from this guy, Brian, who, when I called him, he took great interest in me. And I thought, well, this is a nice guy. As it turned out, he wanted to do some work with Joe. And he saw me as an in to Joe. So he sent me some books seconds, and that started my book collection. And to this day, he said, you never paid me for those books. I said, you told me you were sending those for me free. Sadly, Brian is no longer with us, so I'm not making fun of him out of school here. He was a lovely man and diminutive, but just a fire. Oh my God, a fire plug of a guy, and just dynamo at the bar. I mean, and his collection was bought by that massive collection in Milano that's curated by Model. He bought that collection from Brian. And I tried to get it for the Museum of the American Cocktail to no avail. He said, you guys aren't even going to be here in 2 years. I'm not going to take a chance. We're still here.
I was lucky enough to, on a couple of occasions at Tales, cross over with Brian. And yeah. And again, as I mentioned, Chanticleer back in the day, like he was very prolific on Chanticleer and on Robert Hess's platforms when we
Drinkboy.com.
Yeah, well, yeah, Drinkboy.com, when we used to like log in at God knows what hours and like send little pictures and what we just picked up, and when you could still get a Jerry Thomas on eBay for $50. But yeah, I got an opportunity I was lucky enough that I got an opportunity to sit down and have a chat with him a couple of times at like
Fabulous.
Spirit Awards or something like that. And yeah, what a dude. And that collection was insane.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I went to his house in Nevada City, California, when I was working on the original Craft of the Cocktail, and used his library.
Well, that's a perfect segue. So fast forward to the Craft of the Cocktail, because the dichotomy between Craft of the Cocktail Volume 1 and Craft of the Cocktail Volume 2 that came out a couple of years ago. The one thing I find a lot of younger bartenders or older bartenders, they get sort of stuck in their ways of like, this is the way it's been done. And of course, because it's yourself or Gary Reagan. Well, Gary Reagan says this way and Dale DeGroff says it's this way. And this is the only way it could do. But you changed up quite a lot between Volume 1 and Volume 2 of Craft of the Cocktail because the industry had evolved. Can you talk us through like that dichotomy of those two editions?
Well, it's funny. I see comments now in the notes of the original 2002 edition. This is just exactly the kind of bartender that is crap, all this stuff about this and that and blah, 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 And I understand it. They're coming from the new millennium. They've got all these perfect tools, and we had nothing. I mean, finding a julep strainer, nearly impossible. Everybody had a Hawthorne strainer. No one ever used it, but a julep strainer, west of the Mississippi, they didn't even know what they were,
Double
And
double strain didn't exist in 2002.
no, and if there happened to be a bottle of Angostura bitters behind the bar, the label was probably missing and nobody knew what was in there. And, the joke among the old time bartenders was, what's going to last longer, my marriage or my bottle of Angostura bitters? It was just that era. But what I did with of the original Craft of the Cocktail, and if he had been around, that bartender who made that comment about what a crap book it was, if he had been around in 2002 and seen what I did, is I took pictures of all the garnishes. I took pictures of my hands manipulating the tools. I took pictures and I talked about technique. If you looked at the cocktail books of the era, it was lists of ingredients, no pictures, no guidance, no nothing. I wanted the book I wanted in 1974, when I started tending bar, is the book I wrote in 2000 when I got the gig with Random House. And I wanted to know, I wanted to see, So the guy was right. It was a lot of it was old hat and it was silly. And I was still using glass and metal, and I still do. And the reason we did is because Joe did not allow jiggering, and he'll laugh at that too. But think about this for a minute. We were in the Rainbow Room, and every fancy cocktail joint in Midtown. And what were they drinking? They're drinking scotch and the Ross vodka and the rock gin and tonic, vodka tonic, martini, Chardonnay, Tab, and this is it. I mean, and so if you went into a bar, they got a big old double old fashioned glass. They filled it with old cold draft ice in that era, by the way, and I'll tell you how that ended. And then just pouring, 2.5 ounces into there. And if you didn't do that, if you took out a jigger, they'd turn right around and walk out. You know who used jiggers in that era? Over on, my neighborhood bar at 78th and Columbus, Patty McGlade's. They had one of those big jiggers, but about 3/4 of it was solid glass at the bottom. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? And the bartender would go like this. If you were a neophyte, he'd go like this and dump it. If you were regular, he'd go like this and keep pouring. You know what I mean? So that was the era. You could not use a jigger anywhere in Midtown because people would just laugh, and go find another bar. So what I had to do at the Rainbow Room in 1987 was figure out how to make these fancy drinks without using a jigger, without using pour spouts, Shawn. He would not allow pour spouts on the back bar. This is a place that did $22 to $27 million gross. You know what I'm saying? So I had 6 months of getting killed. And I went to Joe and I said, Joe, I was a little ambitious with this menu, 26 drinks, Singapore slings, Ramus fizzes, Colony cocktail, blinga dinga dinga dinga, Sazerac. Oh my God. And I said, Joe, I got to cut the menu back a little bit. I haven't figured out the techniques. And I think I miscalculated. And I thought, because it was a very expensive menu that cost a tremendous amount to produce, and it had Milton Glaser graphics, I thought for sure I was a goner. And he said, no, okay, we'll work on it. Show me the new menu, and we'll fix it. And give me some ideas about the manufacturing process, what you're going to do to make it better. That's when I started doing partial batching. Like Singapore Sling, put all the liquor ingredients together in a big gallon jug. It's stupid not to, at the service bar, maybe not at the front bar anyway. So those are the kinds of things that I was up against. Now, in the second Craft of the Cocktail, oh, by the way, when I was working at the Rainbow Room, something just got on my screen here. It's called Rest Stream. Is that anything to do with you?
Me.
How do I shut it down? I can't get it to go away. Just hit home.
Just leave it. It's probably for this stream.
Oh yeah, it's right in front of your face. But anyway, so I'm behind the bar in the early days of the Rainbow Room, and of course Joe knew everybody in Midtown, and there was a bunch of guys in the book business. They all work for Dell, and they're saying to me, "Man, and they got my menu. Where's my menus? What did I do with my menus? I usually have them right on my desk here. Here they are. these menus are the actual menus, by the way, that we used at the Rainbow Room. And this is one of the first ones right here because it's $6.50 for a drink. I'll hold it up there, and you can see the beautiful graphics and look at these drinks. Oh my God, these guys were ready to kill me, right? Just one.
That's
And
a lot.
look at the bottom. We had a whole non-alcoholic section from day one, of actual invented drinks. So this is that menu that I had to change a lot and take a lot off. You see, even the scratches I had on it, I saved it.
Those are the actual edits from.
Those are my edits,
Wow.
And I wrote, I just did a seminar about Joe Baum at Tales of the Cocktail, and his son was on the panel, and his son brought a letter that he found in Joe's archives. Not, thank God it wasn't destroyed. Most of the archives were destroyed at Windows on the World, but this was a handwritten note from me saying, "Dear Joe, I got a great cocktail here that I think has legs. It's called the Mojito, and I had the recipe below. This is like 90, and if you'd like to taste it, come up to the bar." And he just signed off on it, stamped it, and sent it back to me. And I don't know how it got in the archives, but it did. Maybe that was a Xerox that he sent back to me. But Joe must have laughed, because when he opened La Fonda del Sol in the brand new Time Life building in 1960, of the many amazing drinks on that 1960s menu was Mojito Criollo. Joe was the first person to ever put a mojito on a menu anywhere in the United States, and it was that La Fonda del Sol, a celebration of the foods of South America, Central America, Mexico, when Joe and James Beard had a vision together of a new American cuisine. They were so angry that all the 4- and 3-star chefs were all French or Italian on an occasion. And they said, this is not right, So these were attempts, the Four Seasons and La Fonda, to do an American, and not just North American, an America's cuisine, a fusion, and that's what they did over the years with the menus at the Four Seasons, Windows on the World. These were attempts, not attempts. These were menus that changed the game, changed the way we eat and drink in America. I mean, Kevin changed the way people consume wine by multiply it times 1,000. This whole cocktail idea was dead in the water. I couldn't find a menu in 1987 and 86 when I was researching this menu anywhere in Manhattan except the Plaza, the King Cole, the Waldorf, Bull and Bear, and the menu they pulled out of the drawer was like all folded and dog-eared because it was there for Europeans. They never showed it. They only had one copy, and they showed it to Europeans because Europeans insisted on a menu, So they kept the menu, right, for those guys, and probably couldn't make half of the stuff that was, or didn't want to make half of the stuff. That's why they did what they did, The sad part, and this, Shawn, hotel bars in the 19th century were the primo, right up till Prohibition. They were the best hospitality, the best bartending in the country was happening in these bars. I mean, Charles Mahoney, Jerry Thomas, the Planter's House and all the hotels he worked in. All these guys came up through hotel service, And the sad part of it is when I started in the business with strong unions like Local 6 in New York City and the one in San Francisco, where they had work rules, it really killed. Well, first of all, the cocktail got killed by Prohibition. All 90% of the ingredients that we needed were gone overnight. There was one bitters left. That's not true. Abbott's was around until the 50s, but where do you get it? Peychaud's was impossible to get. There was a little company called Fee Brothers in Rochester who had no interest. I remember when by the way, Ted Dr. Cocktail Hay was back in New Orleans for first time in 15 years. We did a seminar about the Museum of the American Cocktail together, Doc and I and Phil Green, the great grandnephew of Antoine Peychaud, which is why we went searching him out for when we opened the museum. And the Doc called Rochester. This is when Joe Fee was just a little kid. in the 90s, and got the old man, the grandson of the guy who founded the company in the 19th century, and started asking him questions. He said, I got no time for this, and he just hung up on him, right? He said, I'm just trying to get the bit. No, I'm not interested. It was only when Joe Fee took over the company that he started pushing and his sister was the chemist, and she started adding the new flavors and all that stuff. I mean, Ted, my partner Ted says, we make, I don't want to get into what he says, but that a lot of the Fee brothers are based on glycerin; they're not based on alcohol. Yeah. All right. So that offends Ted's sensibilities, being a chemist and a distiller.
I love Ted. I was lucky enough.
I do too.
I was lucky enough to have him in Victoria a number of years ago, and I've actually got his first edition kicking around here somewhere, and he signed it. So I've been very lucky and fortunate for that one.
So what I wanted to do with the new book was to celebrate, because so much happened in the intervening years. That was 2020. That was exactly 18. The release of the book was 2001. So, and this was 2020 that I released the second book. So it was a long time ago. And also, I never got a chance but in 2001, we were operating the two tallest restaurants in the world, without a doubt, the Rainbow Room and Windows on the World. Joe had taken over for the second time. He built the original and all the food in both towers, and the Port Authority talked him to doing it again. And so I started so many stories and didn't finish them, but I never could find a menu to study, so I had to go to the books and go back to ground zero. I couldn't hire regular New York bartenders. It would have been stupid. I wanted just people that were quick studies and really friendly. So we started asking people to tell us stories, tell us a life story, tell us a joke. We've been sitting here for almost 3 months now trying to hire 38 bartenders, and just tell us a joke, And if they were nonplussed, I mean, they needed to be able to be, you know what I'm saying? So that was an issue. The issue of the original book, when these Dell folks finished that story, were trying to convince me I needed to write a book. I said, "Yeah, you really think so? I mean, I got all the recipes already. I've been researching them forever, it seems, but that's a great idea." And they said, well, just show us the recipes. That's a start. And then start making notes, about how you found them, where you found them, what books you used, all that stuff. We need all that. So I'm working on this, man. Then I get a call from the executive floor, the 43rd floor. My office is on the 64th floor. I bartend on the 65th floor. Get down here. It was Joe. Not even his secretary. It was Joe. Okay, Joe. I get down there, and he's got a scowl on his face. And as soon as my ass hits the chair, he goes, "What the do you think you're doing? How stupid are you? Do you know who owns the name Rainbow? Rockefeller Center owns the name Rainbow. You can't write a book called The Rainbow Cocktail Book, you fool. Anyway, if somebody is going to write a book about this place, it's going to be me, not you. Get the fuck out of my office." So, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I see what you mean now." So I had to call. Well, how did Joe find out? Because he knew the senior editor-in-chief at Dell, who called him up on the phone and said, "Hey, Joe, your head bartender's writing a book about the Rainbow Room." He's like hell he is. That was one of my missteps. But the things were working that I was doing. So Joe was loath to fire me, and there could have been occasions when he could have fired me. But he didn't, and I'm glad he didn't. So the book that came out in 2020, I celebrated so many people. Where do I start? I took cocktails that I thought were brilliant, new classics, I put them in the book with the name of the bartender, and I had them review the recipes and sign off on it. I talked about the new, there's such a difference between the tools. I mean, the tools, you remember the little orange plastic ball on top of the cocktail spoon? it was either impossible to bend because it was made out of some weird metal, or it bent really easily. And I would give it a little bend so that the end of the spoon would be over the center of the glass, and it made it easier to stir, But when bartenders from the new millennium saw stuff like that, they're going, "This guy's nuts, man. He's talking about bending his bar spoons." Oh.
And just the bar spoon in general, like that was the only bar spoon you could get. Like even in 2000 and
they were made in India, or they were made in Thailand, but they all were terrible.
Yeah, 2008 or 9, I did some videos and people were like, get this guy a real bar. I see YouTube comments now. It's like, get this guy a real bar spoon. Bar spoon is junk. I'm like, that's all you could get in 2009. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
No, I'm talking about 1987. I'm talking about, but when I wrote the book in 2000, it was still that way. No one had started those companies yet. They didn't exist, So I was barproducts.com. I thought I'd found the
Holy grail
mother lode.
Because they had slightly fancier garnish trays.
The garnish trays. That's what impressed me about Sasha Petrovsky when I first met him. My one of my best friends who lived on Eldridge Street, in the only loft building on the street right across from Milk and Honey. His day job was that he was the head of the manufacturing floor at Harry Winston Jewelers on Fifth Avenue. He had been a jazz musician, but he severed some tendons in his playing hand, and later on he was able to get back to some pretty good playing, but he wasn't a professional anymore, and he went into the family business. They were all jewelers. But anyway, he was walking his dog one night, and the mahjong parlor door opened and all these kids came out. And he goes, "Hey guys, what are you guys doing in there?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, there's a bunch of old Chinese guys playing mahjong. What are you doing in there?" He said, "No, it's not. It's a bar." "It's a bar? Oh, I guess I haven't noticed, And so he goes in with the dog. Sasha's alone behind the bar, right? He says, "Whoa, I live right across the street. This is cool. I'll start coming." After work, I go to the Rainbow Room because Dale DeGroff's a good friend of mine, and that's why I have my after work drink. And he says, "Oh, you know Dale DeGroff?" I said, "Yeah, sure. He comes down here for parties all the time." He had the top 2 floors of this loft building, unbelievable loft, marvelous parties. So why don't you bring him in? That's how I got to meet Sasha. And I brought him some books the second visit I made, and he asked me lots of questions. What was I doing about ice? And I said, "Well, not what you're going to be doing, that's for sure. I got 2 $8,000 cold jet machines up at the Rainbow Room. They wouldn't even fit in this place. The ceilings are too low." So the next time I came in, he had all this cool looking ice, chunks and everything. And I said, "Well, I see you solved your ice problem, man." He said, "Yeah, come with me." He takes me into the back room, behind the curtain. And there's, the big, long, low freezers you can put a body in.
Yeah.
He said, "I got this for $50." And I opened it up, and there's all these different size containers where he's freezing up. And then he just cracks them into whatever he needs. This is Sasha. And when you said something about the fancy cocktail trays, it made me think of that, because what Sasha didn't do is go to another bar and say, "Oh, I guess I need that, and I need that, and I need that," because none of it would work in this space. It was too small, number one, and it didn't make sense to him. So when he wanted the garnish tray, he went to this friend of his who was a stainless steel, fabricator, and he showed him a design. He said, it's about that wide and that long, and it's got a drain in the bottom. It's all stainless steel, and on the top, I want all perforations in the top thing so that the water will go through. So I want it to be down about 2.5 inches so that I can have ice in there, and I'm going to put the garnish on top of the ice. He was a problem solver.
Yeah.
That's his genius. His genius was that, and his approach to the business, and his approach to employees. And that was an eye opener for me, The whole thing about bar teams started with Sasha. There were no bar teams. I mean, I had a bar team at the Rainbow Room, so maybe it started possibly with me because we had to have a bar team. We were 38 people strong, and we had to meet on Friday afternoons to talk. Or these guys are ready to kill one another. This was basically arbitration meetings on 3 o'clock on Friday afternoons as needed to keep the women who were scared to death of certain bartenders. Oh, God, I had 13 women, and Joe said to me when we opened, I don't want to see the women behind the front bar, Dale. This is 1987. And you know what? There were no women in Midtown Manhattan except in the burlesque places in Times Square behind a bar. There were no women in the neighborhood bars unless, the Irish bartender got sick and his daughter took over for the night. It just didn't happen, man. And I was kind of, there was a place in Rockefeller Center by the skating rink. And the guy, my head bartender, the business guy, I was the creative guy. He had worked there and he said, we had women, man. Didn't you ever go down there? I said, well, when am I going to go down there? No, I didn't go down there. He said, yeah, we had women behind the bar there. I said, well, let's get some women then, And when Joe said that, I said, Joe, we're probably going to lose some of these women. He said, well, he was just from another era. Mm-hmm. I don't think Joe and the people that he worked with back to the 50s could ever pass an HR exam, could ever get hired,
So we're going to pull the camera down a little bit because I want to frame up your bottles. Pull your laptop camera down. There we go. So this is relatively new. The DeGroff Spirits, Amaro, and Modern Amaro and Bitter. How did these sort of come about? And you partnered with Ted Bro, who's an amazing distiller and historian in himself. But how did this come about? And why was this something that was inkling for you? That was like something that you wanted to do for a long time? So I know there's been the pimento bitters.
Well, it started with the pimento bitters, obviously, which is what this is based on, the Amaro. This is called New World Amaro because allspice is a New World botanical. It didn't exist anywhere except in the jungles of South America and the islands off the coast of South America. It was the only, and it was very difficult for them to get the seeds to germinate anywhere else in the world until they figured something out. The seeds had to pass through the body of a bird or a bat, particularly a bat, because there were a lot of bats around. And when it passed through their bodies, it would germinate. If it didn't pass through their bodies, it wouldn't germinate. So when they figured out how to do that artificially, whatever it was that happened inside the birds, they were able to have allspice trees in other parts of the world, where the climate was right. But we started with the bitters being made in Combier, where he makes his absinthe for Jade Absinthe. I was familiar with him because when I tasted in London Jade Absinthe, oh my God. I never wanted to go back to anything else in the Sazerac. I never wanted to go back to anything else in any absinthe drink, because it was so head and shoulders above anything that was around. And of course, there was nothing around in the United States. I only saw it when I was working in Europe. I was working in Europe a lot. And we decided to, I had at the Rainbow Room a product called Ray and Nephew Pimento Dram Liqueur. And they pulled it off the market because there were only two people using it, me and a guy in San Francisco. And we were basically using it in drops because it was so intense. It was so concentrated. And it was pretty high proof for liqueur. And they took it off the market. And I really was upset because I had it in dashes in like, well, for example, my, where is it here? My Planters Punch. Mm-hmm. How can I make my Planters Punch without this wonderful, So, and other drinks that I used it in periodically. Anyway, I decided that I should probably make some kind of a pimento something. So I went down to Bleecker Street where that botanical store where all the witches go, to get their stuff. And in this bin, probably, the bottom third row is filled with dust. There were these pimento berries, God knows how long they'd been there or whatever. And then I got star anise, which was suffering from the same, a bin full of you had to dust them off. It's really awful. And so I'm using, these things, thinking this is, going to do it. And I just was totally unhappy. And Jill, my wife, just said, well, why don't you just go to somebody who knows, And I thought about Ted. And I asked him if he could do this. He said, I can do it. So it took us about 1.5 years of sending samples back and forth, to get where we wanted to be. And then we manufactured it, Colombier, in big barrels. That's where the maceration took place. And then into a still for the finishing touches. And then the way he does his absinthe,
Mhm.
And he's just a genius of botanicals. And it was really good. We got a nice little piece of the market. We still have, but then when we changed our venue, because we weren't making any money, just enough to buy another pallet, because of all the shipping back and forth and this and that, we moved to Sazerac because that's where Gaz Reagan's bitters were being made. And I thought, well, maybe and they didn't want to buy it or anything like that. We didn't want to sell it, but they said they would contract it for us, And then a month later, we get this nice letter from the TCB telling us that they've decided that they're going to reclassify us as a beverage.
Mm.
Well, 11 months later, and a lot of grappling and letters back and forth, and Ted, the one who got absinthe legal in America, knowing how to do this, it just takes time. Meanwhile, we've lost Universal City, a pallet every 2 months, gone. All of our customers except one stuck with us out in the West Coast, so we had to start from scratch after we finally got permission, made them understand that there was nothing at all different about what we were serving in this bottle. Anyway, that was a very big disappointment. And that's when COVID came along. And during COVID, I put sugar in my bitters, our bitters, Demerara sugar. I just turned it into liquid and put it in there. And I tasted it with my wife. And I said, well, to start. So I said, Ted, put some Demerara sugar syrup in our Amaro. And he called back and he said, it's a start. And that's where we started. And Ted started working on a formula with additional botanicals. And I in one of our tastings, I said, Ted, well, the problem now is it's 100% botanical and we need a fruit element. Got it. Back and forth again for another 6 months to a year. By the end of COVID, we had come up with this product. We got in 10-gallon batches right where we wanted it. We were partnering with Hood River, where he had sold his the original absinthe, which he brought to America. He had sold to Hood River. You know the one I'm talking about. I'm an old man and I'm forgetting everything. I'll Lucid. And so they were the proud owners of Lucid, and they were the distributors of Jade absinthe. So they loved our idea of coming out with an Amaro and a bitter aperitivo, the bookends of dinner. And so negotiation, we are 50-50 partners with them. They own Clear Creek. They had bought it when they sold one of their whiskey brands, and they were cash heavy and wanted to get some more product in-house. They bought Clear Creek from close to the end of his life when Steve McCarthy was just before he passed. And he wanted everything to remain, and everything did remain. The Douglas fir liqueur and the apple and all the stuff is still there, And then we make this there, both of these products there, to Ted's protocols. And that's how it all happened. And that first 500-gallon batch, I wish we hadn't released it, but we did. I kept saying to the master distiller then, there's a new woman now there, but he got a job with a whiskey company in Colorado and left. I kept saying, it's not what we tasted and the fruit is gone, and he said, oh, we can fix that, so back and forth, back and forth, never fixed it. It was a clove bomb, and so we pulled the remaining. Well, first of all, we didn't bottle it all. We left some of it in a tank, and the stuff that was bottled, we put in a warehouse. We tried to get as much back as we could from the distributors. Some of it was in the market already, and I was very unhappy, now you get that kind of word of mouth in the beginning, and it's tough to overcome it, And then when this batch came out, the second 500-gallon batch, brilliant. I mean, just delicious. It's got the cherry back, and it's, And still, it's an uphill battle. The bitter aperitivo was never a problem. I mean, we called it the Negroni. We called our Negroni the Degroni. We had a whole Degroni program going. But anyway, we're picking up more and more states. We just picked up Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Thank you, because I live here. And we're getting Connecticut I would say by October 1st.
Nice.
Those are really important to me. But we've got all the biggies. We've got New York, New Jersey, Texas, California, Oregon, Washington. Those aren't biggies, but Illinois is a biggie. We don't have Florida. That's a hard nut to crack when you have these kinds of products, And we don't have New Orleans yet, but we could probably crack that, but we haven't yet, We're getting Vegas. We're going to go with Vin Sauvage in Las Vegas.
Nice.
That's a biggie for me, because I go there for different things.
So Dale, you've been you've been here for the start of the cocktail renaissance, the post renaissance of the generation, my generation of bartenders who are now getting into their 40s, and now you're getting to see the pre-pandemic, the post-pandemic, post-pandemic bartenders, which are, I personally, the next generation of bartenders are very, very different, because a lot of them became bartenders during the pandemic because they were like, well, I'm stuck at home, I may as well make sourdough bread or learn how to bartend. And they come out of the pandemic and they're starting to become very well-known bartenders outside of it. I personally feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect between the past and the present right now. Do you see that? Because you travel a lot, you tell the stories, you do seminars and stuff. Do you feel like there's this sort of definite 3-generation section that you get to see?
Yeah, I'm finding that a lot of young bartenders still get recommended my book by older bartenders. That's nice, the new one, and that's a nice thing for me. But I do think that the one thing that's here to stay was what I spoke about a few minutes ago, is the idea of teams. They even celebrate them with awards now. There were no teams, Shawn. I don't know how to explain what the old bartending scene was like, but there were no teams. You had a register and the other bartender had a register, and you each had your drawer. You never touched another bartender's drawer. And you might get a call on a Saturday afternoon to come in a little early for your shift, and the boss is sitting behind the desk, hey, listen, Dale, you did $1,200 on your register last Saturday night, and Shawn did 2,000. What the fuck? I mean, is this going to be the regular thing? Because if it is, maybe I can't use you.
Mm.
That's the kind of teams we had. You know what I mean?
It was everybody for themselves, that's for sure. I worked in teams like that in the very beginning. It's like everybody was for themselves.
We were friendly. I mean, don't get me wrong. We still, but you had your customers, he had his customers. You remember what it was like.
Shift passing the night, you'd clock in, you clock out, and that would be pretty, especially in union mentalities. That's the sort of way it was.
Yeah, and I loved it. I thought bartender. And by the way, I will never diss that the bartenders of those eras past. I went to work in 1974 at Charlie O's in Rockefeller Center, a Joe Baum extraordinary place. Even though it was an Irish place, it was very different from your average Irish place. It opened right after the World's Fair, and he got the bartender from the 1964 World's Fair, Mike Flynn, who made 1,000 Irish coffees a day at $1 a coffee, wow. Hired him to run this bar because he knew that Mike knew all about things Irish, right? He had come over on the boat, right before the World's Fair. Lovely guy and absolutely mild-mannered. But if you cross Michael, I mean, if you decided you were going to start throwing F-bombs around at his bar, oh no.
Yeah.
He'd pick up your glass and he'd say, I'm sorry, we don't operate that here. This one's on me, but don't come back unless you're going to behave yourself. I mean, these guys were, I was at the service end watching these two guys, Mike and Pat. And boy, what an education that was. Oh my God. Because the people that came to this place, we're talking, top-notch advertising and business executives from Rockefeller Center, gangsters, sports people. We got the whole media in our buildings all around us. It was just such a crazy crowd, and these guys handled them like they were, children and they were just, and they handled him so beautifully, and with courtesy, by the way. And there was a tremendous amount of that in those days, unless they didn't treat you with courtesy.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's I don't know what we were talking about, why I thought, we were talking about what's different. The biggest thing is that I love the idea of the teams. I love the idea that we have speed rack. I love the idea that Tony Abuganan has taken his aunt opened a bar right after Prohibition. You know the story.
Yep.
He's told it a million times. He bought that bar, by the way. That's his retirement bar. And now he's got Tales of the Cocktail. It's the Helen David Foundation raising money for, cancer yeah. So I mean, we didn't. What's his name from Zigzag? I'm getting old.
Stenson.
Yes. If he had had a heart attack 20 years before that, believe me, there wouldn't have been a crowd rise for $250,000 to give him his surgery that he needed to live on for another 7 years or whatever it was, and be a bartender and be his life, and maybe longer. I don't remember. That was the internet, of course. The internet changed the game, and the bartenders now they can have any kind of education they want to invest themselves in. It's all there. It's all right there in this phone, in my computer. It's all there. It's just about you finding it, and that's not hard. I mean, for me to find out that there was a guy out in Nevada City, California, that had a large collection of cocktail books, I mean, what were the chances of that? Somebody had heard the story that maybe this guy, whatever. I wrote a friend in New Orleans. Do you have any idea how I could get Peychaud bitters for the Rainbow Room? I can't figure out how to buy it up here. Gaz Reagan made orange bitters for me at the Rainbow Room, and for himself at his house. That's how Gaz orange bitters came into being. I was using orange bitters at the Hotel Bel Air when the last bottle was empty. It looked like a little Benedictine bottle. It was probably, what was that company? I don't remember. But I just put it on the requisition. And this is when I had got the day shift. Before my friend Paul was the steward, there was this very officious Austrian guy who was the steward. And he comes out with his notepad. Grand Marnier. G-R-A-N-D. Grand. Not grand. Grand. Grand is my grandmother. And he walked in. Well, I had this bitters on there. What is this? And I said, well, I ran out of those. What's wrong with you? This is from before Prohibition. It's from then blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I don't know. What are you talking? It went empty, and I needed another bottle. I had a guy who drank pink gin.
Nice.
I guess I got the last of what had been a nice row of bottles down there in the caves underneath the hotel, dug into the stone, right?
I remember when I first took over Clive's in 2009, of all times. I actually found 2 bottles of pre-1985 Benedictine because it didn't have a barcode. And I was like, this is cool. Just because you always find those sort of archivey sort of things. So with the new generation sort of growing, where do you see bartending going? And do you feel like it's just going to go from strength to strength to strength?
I do. The analogy I use is if there were 2 great chefs in the 19th century, one at the beginning, one at the end. Caramé was at the beginning, and L'Escoffier was at the end. And Caramé came up with the idea of mother sauces for the culinary side of the business, and Escoffier codified it as 5. And we have finally codified our mother sauces. The strong stirred drink, the sour, the long drink, the wine, strong spirit with a wine additive, that whole category. We have what are the basis for literally thousands of drinks if you want to start. Maybe not back then because there were so few spirits, 1,500 to be exact, in the United States after Prohibition. You know what there are now? Almost, they tell me, worldwide, verging on 5,000 gins. Gins? What? The least favorite, supposedly? I mean, well, then how many tequilas are there? How many whiskeys are there? How many? We are in an embarrassment of riches, and we have become culinary. So what we have with the people says, well, what's the new trend? I said, trend? Joe used to get so angry at that word, trend. I don't want trends. If I have a trend, the place will be closed in 6 months when the trend moves on to another trend. Trendy places are not what I want to run. I want classic places where classics are always going to be there and always going to be great. Don't talk to me about trends. And so when bartenders, they get, or chefs, they always get the journalists say, "What's the big flavor?" What do they say? Pomegranate, because they've been working on pomegranate recipes for the last 3 months. So that's the new flavor for them. And so they make it the new flavor because they're the hottest chef around. It becomes the new flavor, It's a game, that kind of stuff. So for me, I would say we have finally found our home in the culinary world. We're getting awards for it at the Beard Awards for the first time. We got 3 more this year. What I was talking about before we went on the air, 3 new, besides the one that exists after I won the next year, the Outstanding Cocktail Program. Now there are 3 more. So we have been accepted by our brothers on the culinary side of the business. We've been accepted by the guests who are really not shocked when they find every kind of pepper known to man, perhaps in their margarita or in their whatever. They're not shocked when they see that we've taken their drink apart and we're serving it in parts and with foams and things, or on a popsicle stick or whatever. They're not shocked, They're kind of going with it, As long as there's a high degree of deliciousness, they don't care. They love it, So what's happening, I think, is that if you were to ask, a Scoffier, well, what's the new sauce? He said, what's the new sauce? I have 5,000 I can make from the bechamel alone.
Yeah.
I have another 5,000 I can make from velouté. I have another 5,000 I can make from the tomato. What are you talking about? From the hollandaise, I don't mean bechamel. But that's kind of how I feel. There is no ceiling anymore. It is a creative endeavor of the highest. But in a sense, I still think it's a craft. You have to be a craftsman to do this, but you also have to take a cooking class, take a flavor class, take a tasting class. That when we did the 5-day master's class and you'd have 140 bartenders in front of you, terrified about the whole tasting through of 200 spirits, terrified. And we would just say, guys, look, you go to a gymnasium where they have a weight room. Do you walk over and pick up a barbell that's got 200 on each end and throw it over your head? No, you don't. You start with 50, 25 and 25, and you work your way up. You've got to build a library up here and here if you're going to be a good taster. You got the same equipment I got. If you hear me smell something and say it smells like gladiolas, well, but figure out what that smells like. Put it in the library. Start building your own library. You are a good taster because you have the same equipment I have. Do you like this? Yes. Do you like that? No. See, there you are. You're an expert. You're an expert on what you like and what you don't like. Now you just have to take that one step further. You have to be able to say, okay, I know that I'm not a big fan of cilantro, but this guy puts cilantro in this drink because it's a part of a Thai drink program. And I got to give it a chance now. I'm going to forget about the fact that I don't like cilantro. It's a really, really well-balanced drink, aside from the fact that I don't like cilantro. And I've got to be able to say that, So the bartender of today is an absolute chef of his bar. A lot of them have their own, herbs growing somewhere. If you happen to be living in the country, that's been happening for decades. At least two decades now. So I'm amazed, and I don't think it's a matter of everybody wants to say, oh, the cocktail revolution is over. Oh, it's not like it was. I sat next to a guy in 1969 waiting, hoping that the woman who was going to visit me at the bar was going to give me a room because I was living in the YMCA, And I had gone to a jazz club that week. I was new in New York, and I was a big jazz fan. I went to see this guy that I met up in New England, because my best friend's other older brother was a jazz piano player. And I was saying, I went to the Half Note down there in what is today Tribeca, but back then it was just like, this was the only in an outpost of dark buildings. There was this neon that said Half Note Jazz Club, right? And Little Jazz, Roy Eldridge, who played with Gene Krupa back in the 40s, was the man. And I had an extraordinary experience there with my friend. And I was talking to this old guy at my neighborhood bar about it, and I was just going on and on. And the guy looks at me like, you think your New York is great? You should have seen my New York. Shit, And I said to myself at that moment, I will never, ever, be that guy who says you should have seen my bartender. You should have seen our cocktails. Come on, man. You think you called it? What is this shit?
So what are you up to for the rest of the year? Have you got a busy schedule? Because
I got a big halt coming up. Getting a new knee on October 31st, which means December, January, February, March, maybe April, I'll be back on the road, depending on how well this thing goes.
Yeah.
That was a right knee automobile accident back in the day when I didn't have insurance. And the doc said to me, well, you don't have the surgery. It's going to come back to haunt you. Well, it's haunting me.
That's what I'm waiting for too. I've got bad knees from playing football, and it's been like, I'll wait till I'm a little bit older and I can slow down and I can forcibly be slowed down instead of right now. I got too much shit to do.
Yeah. Well, I got a 10-year reprise. I went to a guy who said, we got to replace that knee. And then I went to another guy who did an MRI. This guy only did an x-ray. And the guy with the MRI was a pretty good guy. And he said, I can fix this. It's a medial meniscus. I can clean it out and you're going to be okay for a while. You don't need a new knee. So I got 10 years hiking with my wife. It's only in the last year and a half that the hiking has become difficult. Yeah. And I'm pounding the pavement in New York City, and that's become really difficult. So up and down subway stairs, really difficult. So I'm looking for elevators now, and it's embarrassing,
So thank you so much for this chat. We're at the stage of the podcast today. I always drop 5 deep podcast questions at the end of the podcast for every single guest.
Okay.
What is the one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
Arriving in New York and realizing that the life in the bar rooms was really life in New York. I mean, the New York City Bar and Grill wasn't famous worldwide for no reason. And I immediately fell into that. And even though I was trying to be an actor, I fell into that world. And I never really got out.
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
Be a critical thinker. Don't buy what people are selling. You got to think for yourself. If you think it sounds a little weird, it probably is.
I appreciate that. Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
How to listen. Took me a long time to learn that. I wanted to tell everything about me and everything I knew within the first 5 minutes. It took me a long time to shut up and listen.
How do you define success, and has your definition of it changed over time?
I suppose I kind of always knew what it was because I gravitated towards the thing that I loved, and it became a success. And I guess that's it. Success is doing what you love to do. And that's one thing I tell young bartenders. If you're working for a guy who doesn't share your vision of this business, fire your boss. Why would you stay with people like that?
That's awesome. What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps What? Well, this one's a weird one because I'm talking to fucking Dale DeGroff, the King cocktail. Like this one's just this is one that is like you've already have such an amazing legacy. But what do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
My legacy, I hope, is that I made it okay to be a bartender again.
Wow, that's awesome.
End of story.
That's fucking just mic drop that and just be done. That's a pretty good fucking legacy to leave behind. I think that I usually leave these questions and be done with them, but like growing up, I had a full scholarship to go off to university, become a psychologist, do the whole shebang. Very proud mother, that sort of thing. And then I get into bartending, and for the first 7 or 8 years of bartending, my mom's like, "When are you going to get a real job?" The usual thing, like, "When are you going to get a real job?" You're a poor country kid, and you're just like giving up scholarships to university, and your mom's like, "When are you going to get a real job?" And it wasn't until I can't even remember, I think early 30s, that my mom was like, "I get it now." Like she saw something, or she saw a few things like that happened, and she's like, "I get it now. Like you've done pretty good."
Shawn, there are parents all over this country looking for this guy, Dale DeGroff. His kid quit law school to become a friggin' bartender.
Your wanted poster on the fucking fridge. And very last question: what is your favorite cocktail at the moment, and outside the Negroni?
It will always be the martini, but now it's not easy anymore. That first time I walked into Pegu Club and a former student of mine, Audrey Saunders, set down that fitty in front of me with a dash of orange bitters. I said, "Oh my God, you just destroyed my life, Audrey. I've been ordering Beefeater extra dry with an olive and a twist my whole life. And now you put this in front of me and I'm totally confused. Now I don't know what to order." So I started looking for the perfect fitty at every bar that I went to, right? And now that I'm 76, it fits right into my age, doesn't it? It's exactly the right proportion for somebody who's 76 years old.
I've called the right amount of vermouth, so you can have like 3 of them.
I'm blending like a lot of people are, but I started blending them. I'm for lots of different reasons because they're so interesting. There's a place in Manhattan called it's in the Civilian Hotel at 48th and 48th Street and 8th Avenue, and it's called whatever it's called. It's the second floor of the hotel, and I forgot the name of it, but it's got next to the bar a temperature-controlled cabinet with 200 vermouths from around the world, which I am working my way through 5 little tastes at a time. It is so fascinating where that category has gone and where it's still going.
That's amazing. Well, Dale, honestly,
Rosevale. The bar is called Rosevale. I don't want to diss my pals over there. Thank God it came to me.
Dale, honestly, I'm just absolutely grateful that you've given me the opportunity to sit down on the podcast again, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Shawn. I'm very jealous of the part of the world that you're living in, although I'm living in paradise here too. We don't have as many big billfish swimming around as you have swimming up the Humboldt Current right offshore up there.
Exactly. But I'll let you get back to paradise in the afternoon, and hopefully I'll chat to you very soon, my friend.
Ciao, Shawn.
Thank you.